Hey guys, this is Chubs back again with another ZDoom ACS scripting tutorial, and today we're going to be covering arrays. So an array is pretty much like a collection of variables or values of the same type. So for example, you can have an integer array, and that would be like a collection of integers, or you could have a string array, which would be like a bunch of strings, and so on and so forth. So this is useful for when you want to store a bunch of related data all in one spot instead of having it spread out across all these different variables. And so one example of a case where that might be useful would be like a player inventory system. So instead of having all these different variables for like all the different inventory slots, you can instead just have a single array and then store all of the inventory information inside that array. And that would be much easier to work with and maintain, and it would just be much more efficient overall. So before we get further into arrays, let's just go ahead and take a quick look here at this setup that we have. This is a brand new example map that I've made. So we have a player start, and just to the right of the player start we have a switch that's been raised up, and then immediately ahead of the player start we have a teleporter, and then we have a map spot that's been placed right on top of the teleporter. And so the main objective today is going to be to create a random monster spawner. So we want to make it so that when the player flips this switch, a random monster is spawned here at this map spot. And the way that we're going to be doing that, of course, is by using arrays. So this will be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but the way that we're going to be doing the randomization is we're going to be going to the ZDoom Wiki, and we're going to be getting the spawn numbers for a bunch of different monsters, and we're going to be storing those inside of an integer array. And what we're going to do is whenever this switch is flipped, we're just going to pick a random number or one of those random spawn numbers from that array, and then whenever we spawn the monster using that random number, that's going to be the randomization aspect of it. So that's how that'll work. But anyways, let's go ahead and let's take a look at arrays and take a look at how you would actually go about creating them and working with them. So let's pop open the script editor, and let's zoom in just a little bit here, and you can see we have a totally blank slate. So first of all, let's put the mandatory line here at the top, and that is the # include, and then inside quotations zcommon.acs, and then go down a couple lines. And when you create an array, it's pretty similar to when you create a variable. So you first start with the type. So if we want this to be an integer array, we just type int space, and then the name of the array. So if we want this array to be named my array, we would just type that. And then this is where it gets a little bit different. So instead of just going ahead and doing equals and then typing whatever you want, you first need to type a pair of brackets after this array, and then whatever comes inside these brackets determines the size of the array. And this basically is what determines how many values of this type can be stored inside of it. So if we want to store 5 integers inside this array, then we could type 5, and then you can do equals, and then instead of going ahead and typing some numbers out, you first need to type a pair of braces similar to the braces that come after a brand new script. And then inside these braces you can go ahead and you can type the different values that you want separated by commas. So since this is an integer array and we've given it a size of 5, let's go ahead and let's type 5 different integers, and like I said, let's separate them with commas. So I'll type 1 comma 25 comma 3 comma 70 comma 100, and then at the very end we'll just type a semicolon. So to do a quick recap here, we have created a brand new integer array called my array. We've given it a size of 5, which means it can store 5 integers, and then we have initialized it with the following values: 1, 25, 3, 70, and 100. So let's compile it, make sure. You can see we didn't get any errors. So this array now has these numbers inside of it, or these integers inside of it. Now let's take a quick look at how you would sort of manipulate values inside of an array, or even pull them out. So let's create a brand new script. This will be just a really quick and easy example script. Let's call it script 1. And instead of doing a void or like some sort of a parameter or something, let's just type enter. And what this does is this makes it an enter script, which means that this script runs whenever the player enters the map. So this script will just run automatically, and that means that we don't have to tie it to a switch or a walkover line or anything like that. And then let's go ahead and type some braces. And let's say that we want to go to this array here, and we want to grab 3, this specific number here. And then let's say we want to change this to 50. Let's say that we want 3 to become 50. Well, what we can do is we can type the name of the array and then type brackets again, almost like when you're creating the array, except here, instead of the number inside the brackets being the size of the array, this will be referring to the index of the element that you want to grab. And this is the really important part, and the part that gets beginners a lot. Array indexing always begins at 0. And so if we go up here to our numbers that we put inside this array, this is index 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. So if we want to get the very first element of this array, we would not type 1. Instead, we would type 0. So this would be referring to 1, the very first element. If we want to get the very last element, we can't type 5 because that would go out of bounds, because there's nothing at index 5. Instead, index 4 is the last element here, 100, because again the index numbering starts at 0. So if we go through this again, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's easy to become confused over that, because you see a 5 here. That's sort of what makes it confusing. The important thing to keep in mind is that this 5 that you see here, like whenever you create an array, this is what determines the array's size. This, however, like if you're ever manipulating an array or pulling out its information, whatever you put in between the brackets here is the index. So you always have to keep that in mind. The index numbering always starts at 0, and if you're just creating an array, this is the size, this is the number of elements. This does have 5 elements in it, so this is still valid. But if you want to grab like the 5th element, then it would actually be at index 4, because once again index numbering starts at 0. I really wanted to repeat that several times because it's extremely important. So going back to what we were just talking about earlier, let's say we want to grab 3 and change it to 50. Well, let's count these indexes again. 0, 1, 2. So 3 is at index 2. So let's type 2 here, and then just like with changing a variable, you can do equals and then 50. So when the map starts and this enter script runs, the second the element at the second index of this array, which is 3, becomes 50. And we can prove this by using a print statement. So let's do print. I think we used this in the first tutorial. And then inside parentheses here, you can see it first asks us for the type. That would be an integer, so we can just type I, colon, and then it asks for the expression. So what we can do is we can just type this right here. Let's type my array, and then again what we're typing here is referring to the index, so we'll type an index of 2. So what this is going to do is it's going to print an integer on the screen, and the integer it's going to print is whatever is at index 2 inside my array. So it'll be this element right here. Now if we did not have this line of code here that changes it to 50, then whenever this script ran, 3 would be printed on the screen. However, since we have this line here now, whenever this runs, since the element here at index 2 is being changed to 50, 50 should print on the screen. Let's go ahead and let's compile this. You can see we didn't get any errors. And let's go ahead and run this. And again, this is an inner script, so this will run as soon as we get into this map, so I'm not going to need to flip any switches. But pay close attention here. Whenever I enter this map, you should see 50 pop up on the screen. So let's go ahead and run it here real quick. Alright, so the text was a little small. It might have been tough to see, but 50 did indeed show up. And let's go ahead, just to prove it, let's just erase this line here altogether. Let's only have the print line so that this element is not being changed at all. It's only being printed. Now let's run it again and see what number shows up. So you can see that time, since we had not made any changes to it, 3 showed up because we are referring to the element at index 2. So that's just a quick example of how you create an array and how you access the information in the array using index numbers. So now let's get back to our main goal today, to make a random monster spawner. Let's just go ahead and erase everything that we have here and start with a blank slate. We do want to keep this line at the top. And to recap what we want to do, we want to make it so that when this switch is flipped, a random monster is spawned here at this map spot. So going back to what I had said earlier, we want to create an integer array, and inside of that array we want to have a bunch of different spawn monster or a bunch of different spawn numbers. And a spawn number basically determines what type of monster is going to spawn. So let's first go over here to the ZDoom Wiki, and to pull up the list of spawn numbers, an easy way to get to them is to go up here to the upper right hand corner in the search bar and just type spawn numbers, and you should see a suggestion here, and if you click this, it'll take you to the spawn number page, and this lists like all the Doom engine games. You can just click Doom, and right here is a list of all of the spawn numbers. This is not just enemies, this also has the spawn numbers for items. Like you can see for a med kit the number is 24, for a shotgun the number is 27, and so on and so forth. It just keeps going. There's a whole big list of them here, but we're going to be spawning monsters, and let's say we want to pick 3. Let's say we want to randomly spawn one of 3 different monsters. I'm going to keep these low-level monsters, so let's do a former human, a former sergeant, and an imp. Let's say that those will be our 3. So you can see the former human, which is the zombie man, has an ID of 4, or a spawn number of 4. The former sergeant, which is referred to as the shotgun guy, has a spawn number of 1, and the imp has a spawn number of 5. So the 3 numbers that we're going to need are 1, 4, and 5. These refer to the former human, former sergeant, and the imp. So 1, 4, and 5. Let's keep those numbers in mind. So let's go ahead and create an array with those. So let's do int, and let's just call this monster numbers. And the size of the array will be 3, and then we'll do equals, and then the braces. And remember that the numbers that we wanted were 1, 4, and 5, so let's do 1, 4, 5, and put a semicolon at the end. So we have just created an array of integers, and these integers pretty much refer to the spawn numbers that we just got from the wiki. So nice and simple. Now let's create the script that's going to run when the switch is flipped. So let's do script 1, and we're not going to do enter this time. Instead, we're just going to do void. We're not going to be passing it any information or anything. And then braces. And the first thing that we want to do with this script is we want to get a random index. And this is what's going to do the random picking in this array. So remember what I said going back, and it's important for me to repeat this. Index numbering starts at 0. So with this particular array, the index numbers that we have are 0, 1, and 2. So 2 is the maximum number. And an easy way to remember this is take the size of the array and subtract 1 from it. So the size of this array is 3, and that means that the maximum index number is going to be 2. So let's, inside of this script, let's just do an integer variable, a brand new integer variable, and let's set it to a random number between 0 and 2. So we'll do int, and we'll just call this random index equals, and here is a really cool function that's built into ACS. Anytime you want to get like a random number, all you have to do is type random, and then inside parentheses you can see that it asks for a minimum and a max. So the minimum, remember, is going to be 0, and the max, which would be the max index for us, will be 2. And then put the semicolon at the end. So what we have just done here is created a brand new integer variable. And going back to what I had said in I think the first tutorial, since this is inside of script 1 and not above it like this array, this random index variable is only visible to script 1. If we write any other scripts, this variable will not be seen outside of it. I just want to point that out. But like I was saying there, we've created an integer variable called random index, and this is going to be set to a random number between 0 and 2. So basically, when this is all said and done, this variable is going to be either 0, 1, or 2. And that ensures that it will, become something that's within these array bounds. Now let's do the important part here, and that is the monster spawning. So I think in the previous tutorial we had used this function here, but this has always been my favorite for spawning monsters, and that is thing_spawn facing. And what this does is it spawns a thing at a map spot, and then it makes it face the same way that the map spot is facing. So it sort of takes care of that work for you. This has just always been the one that I like to use. Let me zoom out here just a little bit if I can. Alright, so let's type some parentheses, and you can see it's already giving us our suggestion. So the thing ID, this is the map spot ID. I went ahead and gave the map spot on the teleport a tag of 1. I did that ahead of time, so let's type 1, comma, and here is the most important part, the type. So if you remember in the last tutorial, for the type, we had to put in the type of monster that it spawned. And this refers to the spawn numbers which we put up here in this array. So what we're going to do, instead of typing some sort of a number like 5 or whatever, we're first going to type monster numbers, because we want to grab one of these numbers from this array, because these are the type numbers. Remember, these are the different monsters spawn numbers for the former human, former sergeant, and the imp. Next we want to type brackets. And again, the number that we're about to put in between these brackets is not going to be the size of the array, but it is instead going to be the index. And what we want this index to be is the random index. We're going to come back to this here in just a second. So let's type random index, comma. The next thing it's asking us for is whether or not there's going to be fog. Since this is no fog, if we were to type true, then that would mean there would be no fog. If we type false, then that means there will be teleport fog. I do want there to be teleport fog, so I'm going to type false, comma, and then new thing ID. This is like the new ID that the monster that spawns will be given. We're not going to need that because we're not going to be messing with these monsters after they spawn, so let's just type 0 and then a semicolon at the end. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit more again, and I want to go back over this part here because this is really important. So going back up here, remember that this integer is being made basically a random number between 0, 1, and 2, or between 0 and 2. So this will become 0, 1, or 2. Now what we're doing here in the thing spawn facing code is for the type, we're taking this array and then we're making the index whatever this random number is. And so as a result, it's going to point to one of these numbers in the array. So let's just pretend that this script runs, and let's do it here ourselves. Let's act like we're the computer and we're making this script run. So when the script runs, this random index is going to become a random number here between 0 and 2. So let's say that it becomes 1. Alright, so since it has become 1, this little bit of code here essentially turns into what you see there. And this refers to index 1, which in this case is 4, because remember, indexing starts at 0. 0, 1, 2. So 1 is 4. So this is essentially the same as this. And so as a result, this entire bit here, if random index were to become 1, this entire bit of code would then essentially be like typing 4, except this is all happening automatically. So I just thought I'd break that down for you guys just in case you maybe didn't get it and let you know what's going on. But this will result in one of these numbers here being picked at random from this array. So I think everything should be in place now for us. You can see it's compiling without errors. So let's go ahead and let's tie the script to this switch, because I've not done that yet. So we'll give it an action of 80. Script number is going to be 1. We do want this to be repeatable because we want the player to keep flipping it and spawning new monsters, and the action will be when the player presses use. So let's test the map and let's see what happens. So you could see as we flip that switch, it kept spawning different monsters, and the monsters that it spawned were basically dependent on the spawn numbers that we put inside this array. It took a while for me to get an imp there. I was afraid I wouldn't get one. Sometimes it can be a little bit stingy, but you know, that pretty much worked just like we'd hoped. So we have successfully set up a random monster spawning system. I do want to show you guys one other thing though, when you work with these arrays. This is something that's pretty important, and this involves for loops. So we're just going to take a quick look at how you can basically run through an array using a for loop and, you know, do things to it, or, you know, just work with like each index at a time until you get to the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this array, and using a for loop, we're going to hit index 0, index 1, and then index 2, and then the loop's going to end. So let's empty this script out and let's start a brand new for loop. Let's do for, and the variable for this is just going to be an integer called I, which is the standard that most people use, and it's going to start at 0. And the condition here, which is the important part, is that I is less than 3. And this will ensure that I never goes past the index, because remember, the max index for this particular array is 2. And you know, if I ever becomes equal to or greater than 3, then this condition will be false and the loop will exit. And then of course the last part is going to increase I. If you want to learn more about for loops, I covered these in the last tutorial and in more detail, so do go back and watch that again if you are confused or if you need to know more about them. So you know, throughout the course of this loop here, I is going to start at 0, and it's just going to keep increasing after each loop pass until it is basically until it hits 3. So it's going to be 0, 1, and then 2, and when it hits 3, this condition is going to be false, and it's just going to empty out. So what we can do here is we can do monster spawn, let's do thing underscore spawn facing. I probably should have left the code in there that we had before. Let's put some of the same stuff back in. Let's do 1 for the ID because that's the map spot ID, comma. For the type, what we're going to do is we're going to say monster numbers, and instead of doing the random index, we're going to type I, and I'm going to come back to this here in just a second. No fog, going to be false. New thing ID, we don't need that for this monster that's going to spawn, so we'll type 0. And what I also want to do, I want to put a delay in between spawning these guys, so let's just put a 2-second delay. So delay, and remember that a tick is 1/35 of a second, so 35 ticks is 1 second, and that means that we can do 35 times 2, and this will be almost exactly 2 seconds. So going back to this part here with I, what we're saying is for each loop pass, we're going to spawn a monster, and the monster that spawned basically refers to one of the indexes in this array, and in this case it'll be whatever the value of I is. So remember that I starts at 0, so the first time this runs, this line right here is going to be the same exact thing as having 0 there, and that'll of course refer to the spawn number of 1. And then whenever that loop pass finishes, I is going to increase, and it'll then become 1, and so this monster numbers part will be basically equivalent to 1, and index 1, remember, is going to be 4, so it'll spawn whatever 4 is, and then it'll increase one last time, and then that'll make it of course 2, and that'll be the last element. So index 2 refers to 5, and it'll spawn whatever 5 is, and then when I becomes 3, this is no longer true, and it'll kick out, and this loop will just exit. So what this does ultimately is it runs through this entire array from start to finish, and it's pretty much spawns whatever these numbers refer to, and there's also a 2-second delay in between each spawn. So let's go ahead and let's compile this, and then let's execute this script here with this switch, and if all goes as planned, we should see each monster spawn with 2 seconds in between. Alright, so that worked exactly like we wanted it to. It ran all the way through the array, and it spawned the monsters with each of these spawn numbers. And so pretty much like any time you want to loop through an array from start to finish, a for loop is going to be the best way to do that. It's since you can set up a temporary variable and start it at 0, which is where the indexing begins, and then you can have a condition here that makes sure it doesn't go past that index. This is just the easiest way to go about doing it. So I think that covers most of the basics with arrays. You can see now how you can create arrays, mess with their indexes, and work with them in some pretty cool ways. Now there are some other things involving arrays that I haven't yet discussed, like multi-dimensional arrays. Those are considerably more complex to work with. I may create a separate tutorial with those, but in most cases regular arrays will probably suffice. You should be able to get most stuff done with those, and hope you guys have learned some stuff from this video. I hope I haven't confused you too much. This is a little complex. Arrays were always one of the things that gave me trouble when I first started learning programming, but if you guys have any questions at all about the arrays, or looping through the arrays, manipulating them in any way or anything like that, just feel free and let me know. But thank all of you for watching, and this is Chubb signing out.